Here on this channel, we love to build custom subwoofer enclosures. But sometimes based on the budget for a build, it might make more sense to just go with a pre-made subwoofer box. Although these mass-produced pre-made enclosures fit most of the corresponding size subwoofers on the market, sometimes the subwoofer mounting hole on these is just slightly too small, leading to a subwoofer that simply won't properly fit. Even when we custom build a subwoofer box, it is possible to make a mistake and make that cutout hole too small, and unfortunately not discover it until later after the box is fully built. Not that I've ever had that happen. So when the subwoofer won't properly fit and the box is already finished, what can we do? That, my friends, is coming on up. Now, speaking of getting a proper fit, when we're selecting aftermarket speakers for a car audio upgrade, we of course want to make sure they fit. And that process is easy with our show sponsor, Crutchfield. On the Crutchfield website, you simply enter the year, make, and model of your vehicle, and for qualifying vehicles, you can see the exact speakers that will fit in each of the different locations within the vehicle. Now, they don't only analyze the speaker size, but they also analyze the space behind the speaker, ensuring that you are able to pick speakers that won't have clearance issues behind the panel. They also will help you get the right wire harnesses for qualifying vehicles so you can easily connect with the factory speaker wiring. To learn more and potentially save on your next car audio purchase, be sure to check out the links down in the video description. So let's talk about the situation that we're facing when matching this particular subwoofer with this particular pre-made subwoofer box. Now, first off, this is a Sound Ordnance pre-made enclosure. I'm actually pretty impressed with these. They have this internal bracing on the inside, which is really cool to see, even with this being a small enclosure. This thing is built to be good and strong. They also have plenty of sealant in there. I really like the quality of this pre-made solution, but unfortunately in the car audio industry, there's really no standard that says, you know, hey, a 10-inch subwoofer has to have this exact cutout size. There is some variation, and that's no fault of the enclosure manufacturer. They're of course going to design this to match most subwoofers on the market, which in this case it does, but every once in a while you do come across a subwoofer that is just ever so slightly too large. To be quite frank, I'd rather have the cutout hole size be quote unquote too small, as it allows for a nice tight fit on the subwoofer, and we can obviously remove material as needed in order to enlarge this for our subwoofer that we're adding. Now, one of the first tools that you might consider when it comes to enlarging a subwoofer cutout hole is a jigsaw. Using a jigsaw for this cutting process isn't necessarily wrong. You're just not going to get as perfect of a result as what we are going to show in this video, which is why this video is titled Like a Professional, because we want to get professional grade results. We want that circle to be perfect. So forget this jigsaw, we're gonna put this away and try something different. First of all, if we look at the subwoofer manual and we convert this millimeter amount to inches, we can see that our goal is a cutout size of 9.375 inches. If we look at our specs for the enclosure on the Crutchfield website, we can see that the cutout for the enclosure is 9.25 inches. So our goal is 9 3/8 of an inch, and our enclosure is currently at 9 1/4. Always a good idea to do a quick double check on that before we make any cuts. Yeah, this is right at 9 1/4. So this is simple math. Let's find out how much material we need to remove. We're gonna do 9.375 minus 9.25, and that's going to leave us with 0.125, which means we need to remove 1/8 of an inch from the diameter. Now, this is a critical step. We wouldn't wanna just cut 1/8 of an inch into this, because that's going to also add 1/8 of an inch over here, which means we would be increasing the cutout size by 1/4 inch overall. So in order to determine how much material we need to remove, we need to divide that value that we got by doing the first value minus the other, and we need to divide that value by 2. So in summary, this minus this equals this, and we need to divide that value by 2. I made a mistake there, and where I put the decimal, it's going to be 0.0625, which is 1/16 of an inch that we need to remove from each side. Now, the router bit that's going to allow us to complete this task like a professional is called a rabbiting bit. Now, there are different size of rabbet cuts that you can make. I'm gonna put a graphic on screen because the dimension that you're typically going to want to pay attention to is from the edge of the bearing here over to the edge of the cutting flute. In this case, this is a 1/4 inch rabbiting bit. And with this rabbiting bit, you can barely see the difference between the bearing and the cutting flute because this is a 1/64 of an inch rabbet bit. Now, the advantage of a rabbet bit set like this from our other show sponsor, Mobile Solutions, is the fact that we can easily grab one of these rabbiting bits and be ready to go. But I do want to point out that there are other rabbiting bits on the market, kind of like this one here. And the difference is with a rabbiting bit like this, you would simply remove that bearing and you can then swap to a larger bearing, which would thus change the dimension of your rabbet cut. My point is there are multiple different options out there on the market to do this process. Some are very efficient, but if you're not doing this process every day and all the time, you could go with a lower cost option. Now remember, I need to remove 1/16 of an inch from each side, so let's load up this bit. And a quick side note on the math, it's very possible that you're not going to end up with perfect math like I did in this situation, in which case you're just going to round it to the closest value that is slightly oversized. If your subwoofer cutout hole is a 32nd of an inch oversized, you're really not going to even notice. But remember, for our application as it stands currently, I cannot even get this subwoofer to completely seal into the box. If you're not familiar with what this is called a router lift. So I have my router actually mounted into this table here, and I can raise and lower it. This is called a collet. I've selected a 1/2 inch collet to match my 1/2 inch shank router bit here. And you don't want to push it all the way down in. You want to kind of lift it up a little bit. And using the wrenches here, we can tighten this bit in. And now we can lower it and we can re-add our insert. Now imagine that this scrap piece here is the inside of the subwoofer box. We wouldn't want this bit to be too high like this, where the bearing is over the inside surface, because then this is just going to cut into the material and it's going to keep cutting because there's nothing to stop it. We want it to stop on the bearing, which means we need to lower it so that the bearing is going to ride up against that wood material. Our goal here is to simply create a small notch. Now that I have that height locked in position, there's a couple more things that I really want to make sure I pay attention to. One, I want to make sure that this wiring doesn't get in the way, so I've kind of tied it back inside there. That way it's not getting tangled in the router bit. I need to make sure that I properly secure it inside there. And also, depending on how much material I did want to remove, I might want to cut away some of this extra carpet using something like a really sharp knife. That way I don't have to worry about the carpet potentially getting tangled. In this case here, I'm removing such a small amount of material, I don't think it's going to be an issue. Now you may have noticed that I've drawn a couple of arrows on this here, and that's to remind myself which direction the bit is spinning, because I want to make sure that I push against the direction of the bit when I'm doing this cutting pass. Also worth noting, if you're new to the channel here, I do have dust collection, so you're not going to see any of the wood dust. Let's make this cutting pass. Taking this off the router, here's what we've done. We've added a small notch. You can see we've cut away the original surface here, and we now have a small step, if you will, into the material. Now here's the interesting thing when it comes to getting these subwoofers to fit. Sometimes just removing that small notch from the top is more than enough, because the subwoofer flange kind of flares a little bit as it goes into the hole. So let's just do a quick test fit here, and you can see we're no longer getting any rocking motion whatsoever. This subwoofer now perfectly fits this enclosure. Theoretically, we could stop right here. We now have a subwoofer that fits perfectly. But I hear ya. What if you do want to still remove that small notch? We can use this. This is a top bearing bit. Now I know that might be a little bit confusing. You're thinking, Mark, that bearing's on the bottom. Why is it a top bearing? In router bits, everything is always referred to in its handheld application. So if you had a handheld router, the bit would be like this. So this is a top bearing bit, even though we're going to use it in this orientation in our router table. So the way that this works, this again has a bearing on it, but in this case, the bearing is perfectly flush with the cutting flute. So this is a top bearing flush trim bit. And what it's going to do is it's going to ride that bearing against that new notch that we've created, and it's going to make it perfectly even and remove this excess material. So let's load up this router bit. Now this time, instead of using the 1/2 inch collet, I'm going to be using the 1/4 inch collet. And that's because you may have noticed the shank size on this bit is smaller at a 1/4 inch. Again, we'll push it in, lift up slightly, and then tighten this in place. Height-wise, I want that bearing just slightly sticking out of the table so it can ride against our notch that we've already created. And again, I'm gonna make sure everything is secure inside the box so that it can't contact this bit. We're gonna put it on here and make our pass. And with that, we have completely removed that notch that we added. You really can't even tell that we've done anything at all. Not like a jigsaw, we didn't have to worry about the carpet getting messed up. And also, our circle is still a perfect circle. Let's do another test fit here. So there, obviously the subwoofer is fully seated now. You can see we're not getting any of that rocking motion like we were before. And geez, this thing is nice and tight in there. There's no play side to side. We are good to go. Now in this video, we obviously covered what to do when the cutout hole is too small. Thankfully, I find that more often than not with these pre-built enclosures, the hole tends to be on the smaller side, which is ideal as we can obviously always remove material. It's not as easy to add it. But if in the future you guys would like to see a video on what we should do if the hole is too large, I have a unique solution for that as well. Let me know. Now don't forget, next time you are looking to purchase speakers for your car audio upgrade and you want to make sure that they're going to fit, you should check out our show sponsor Crutchfield. More details and potential savings are listed down in the video description. A big thanks to them along with Jerry and the rest of the Patreon membership team, and of course to you guys for making these videos possible. Thank you for tuning in and watching.